The sun was just starting to dip below the tree line, painting the lake with streaks of gold and orange. I had finally finished setting up my little lakeside retreat, a place I'd spent months turning into a peaceful sanctuary. My dock was polished, the small patio area cleared, and the gate that kept the property private, freshly oiled and functioning perfectly. This lake wasn't just water and trees, it was my haven from the chaos of everyday life. I had spent weeks sending polite reminders to my homeowners association, HOA, about the limits of guest access. According to the rules, my property and its gate were private. That meant I had the right to control who came in. I was fully prepared to enforce it if necessary, but I didn't expect the firestorm about to erupt. It started innocently enough. I noticed unusual activity on the property across the street. Hundreds of people unloading cars, carrying coolers, beach chairs, and inflatable toys. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked closer, peeking through the privacy fence. That's when I saw her. Keran, the notorious HOA chairwoman, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a drill sergeant. Apparently, she had invited, or maybe assumed she had the right to invite, an entire social club to my lake. There were over 100 people spread out on the shoreline, some swimming, some laughing, others setting up a makeshift picnic area. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. This was my property, and somehow, in Keran's mind, that didn't matter. I walked calmly to the gate, my keys in hand. Every instinct in me screamed to just let it slide, but years of enforcing my rights, and patience I didn't have much of, told me otherwise. As I inserted the key and turned it, I heard the chatter behind me die down. Heads turned, phones came out. Keran's voice, shrill and unmistakable, cut through the murmur of the crowd. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, striding toward me. Her heels clicked against the wooden dock like warning bells. I looked her in the eye and said calmly but firmly, "I'm locking my gate. This is private property. You need to clear your guests." Her face twisted in disbelief. "I'll have you arrested," she shouted, her voice echoing across the lake. The words sounded more like a cartoon threat than reality, but the intensity of her gaze made it clear she believed it. A few of the guests froze, unsure of what was about to happen. And just like that, the calm golden hour by the lake vanished. The stage was set, and neither of us were backing down. Keran's scream reverberated across the water, startling a group of ducks that had been gliding lazily near the shore. A few of her guests turned toward her, confused and uncomfortable, clearly unsure whether this was a real confrontation or some kind of performance. Meanwhile, I stood by my locked gate, the key still in my hand, feeling a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. Over 100 people had just invaded my private lake. And now Keran was acting like I'd committed the worst crime imaginable. "Listen, Keran," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the racing of my heart. "I don't want any trouble. But this is private property. You don't have the right to bring your friends here without my permission. Everyone needs to leave." Her eyes narrowed, scanning the crowd for support. A few of her guests muttered among themselves, whispering about rules and official HOA privileges, but most of them looked nervous. Keran, however, was in full fury mode. "Do you know who I am?" she shouted. "I'm the HOA president. You can't do this," I interrupted. "Even HOA rules respect private property. You have no authority here, and I'm within my rights," the crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others still unsure. A few teenagers on floaties at the edge of the lake began paddling closer to the shore, clearly sensing the tension and curious to see what would happen. One bold guest, a young guy with a cooler, asked nervously, Aren't you overreacting? Can't you just, stay?" I shook my head. "No, this is private. And the law is on my side. I've asked politely." "That's enough." Keran's face turned red and she took a step closer, pointing a finger at me like a tiny thunderbolt. "I'll have you arrested," she repeated, louder this time, her voice shaking with fury. "Security! Police! Someone call the authorities." Some of the guests gasped while others tried to shush her. The absurdity of the scene was almost comical, a full-blown HOA meltdown on my private lakefront, complete with threats of arrest. I could feel my adrenaline pumping, my mind racing through every possible outcome. But I refused to let her intimidate me. One of the guests, a middle-aged man in a Hawaiian shirt, finally spoke up. Keran, maybe we should just go. This doesn't seem right. His tone carried a mix of caution and wisdom that almost made me smile. The ripple of doubt spread through the group. Keran's fury only intensified. But the first seeds of her losing control were planted. Meanwhile, I tightened my grip on the gate, silently reminding myself that staying calm was the only way to avoid this turning into a disaster. The standoff had begun. My lake, my rules. Keran, her ego. And over 100 confused, nervous guests caught right in the middle. By now, the crowd had mostly stopped their activities, forming a semicircle around the locked gate. The laughter and splashing of a few kids in the water had been replaced by whispers and sideways glances. Keran was pacing, waving her arms like a general rallying an army that didn't exist, while I stayed put, leaning slightly against my gate, key in hand, calm but firm. "You can't just do this!" Keran screeched, her voice shaking with both anger and embarrassment. "I'll call the police right now! You'll be arrested! This is an outrage!" I raised a hand to pause her. "Keran, I don't want conflict. I've asked you politely. I've given you the chance to leave. This is my property. Locking my gate is not a crime." She looked like she might explode. One moment she was pointing, the next she was stomping her foot, threatening to summon imaginary reinforcements. Her guests were shifting uneasily, unsure whether to side with her or quietly slip away. It was clear that even they were beginning to realize this wasn't going in her favor. A young woman near the back, holding a picnic basket, muttered under her breath, "This is so awkward. We shouldn't even be here." Another man nodded, whispering, "Yeah, she's gone too far." Slowly, people started moving toward their cars, casting confused, guilty glances at Keran, who continued her tirade as if the retreating guests were invisible. The absurdity of it all began to sink in. Keran was alone, shouting threats, while everyone else quietly complied. I could feel a mix of relief and disbelief. This wasn't just about enforcing property rights anymore. It was a test of patience and willpower, and so far, I was winning. Finally, she stopped, breathing heavily, her face red as if she'd sprinted a mile. You don't understand who I am," she yelled one last time, but her voice no longer carried the authority she expected. I shook my head calmly. "I understand perfectly. You're the HOA president, and that gives you exactly zero authority over what happens here. It's private property. You invited people without permission. That's your problem, not mine." Her jaw tightened. She opened her mouth again, but the words seemed to stick somewhere in her throat. The reality of the situation was sinking in. She was alone, her threats meaningless, and over 100 witnesses had seen her meltdown. One by one, her guests had left, some casting awkward glances back at Keran, others clearly relieved. The lake was quiet again, the golden sunlight reflecting off the water, peaceful once more. I closed the gate fully, turned the key, and took a deep breath. Victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt calm, just the way I liked it. Keran's screams were fading into the distance as she stomped to her car, muttering about lawyers and arrests, but the lake belonged to me again. For now, at least. The sun had almost disappeared behind the trees, leaving the lake bathed in a soft, silvery glow. The chaos of the afternoon was over, but the echoes of Keran's fury still lingered in my mind. I walked slowly along the dock, my hands running along the smooth wood, trying to absorb the calm that had returned. It was quiet again, just the gentle lapping of the water and a few ducks settling for the night. I sat on the edge of the dock, my feet dangling above the water, thinking about how absurd the confrontation had been. Keran, the self-proclaimed HOA authority, had stormed my property like she owned the place, only to find herself completely powerless. I couldn't help but smile. She had underestimated the simplest of truths. Private property trumps ego. Despite the victory, I knew the drama wasn't completely over. Keran had made threats, and the HOA was known for being persistent. It was likely she would write angry emails, maybe even try to involve law enforcement, but the rules were clear. I had documentation, witnesses, and a legal right to enforce my gate. No amount of shouting or flailing could change that. As I walked back to the house, I noticed a few things left behind: an abandoned beach chair, a cooler, some floaties tangled in the reeds. I picked them up, wondering if anyone would come back for them, but mostly I was just grateful that my lake, my sanctuary, was intact. The thought of hundreds of people casually wandering around again made me shiver. That would never happen on my watch. I spent the rest of the evening sending polite, but firm, messages to the HOA, summarizing what had happened. I stayed professional, not letting anger dictate my words. I included a reminder of my rights as a property owner and offered a simple, clear statement. The gate will remain locked. Uninvited guests are not permitted. Future attempts to bypass these rules will be treated as trespassing. By the time night fully fell, the lake reflected the moonlight, calm and undisturbed. I sat in the quiet, feeling a sense of peace that only comes after a tense confrontation. Keran's threats felt distant, almost comical in hindsight, and for the first time that day, I could fully relax. I realized that this incident wasn't just about enforcing property rules. It was about standing my ground, asserting boundaries, and refusing to be intimidated. Keran might have stormed in thinking she could bully her way through, but I had proven that calm, steady resolve always wins over tantrums and bluster. As I locked the gate for the final time that night, I smiled to myself. My lake was safe. My property was respected. And as far as I was concerned, the HOA and Keran could take their threats and their ego elsewhere. Tonight, I had reclaimed my peace. Enjoying this wild HOA showdown at my lake? Hit that subscribe button to catch more real-life property drama and boundary battles. Give this a like if you were shocked by Keran's meltdown, and drop a comment below. What would you do if someone tried to overrun your space like this?